I want to take a minute and talk to you about the timeout process that we use during PCIT. Many of the families that we've served in the past have used timeout in the past with limited success. Maybe they've used a buzzer system, a timer system, or maybe their pediatrician has talked to them about using 1 minute per the child's age. And while that may work for some families, for other families, perhaps when that timer goes off, the child's still screaming and yelling. And as a parent, you really have to consider, is my child actually ready to get out of the timeout chair at that time? Or maybe since the child's maybe a little bit older, maybe 6 or 7, maybe that's a little bit too long and you run into the problem with your child not wanting to stay in the timeout chair. And that becomes a whole other problem that the parent has to deal with. The other thing that we have to consider is that timeout, by definition, is removal of all forms of attention. And sometimes when parents describe the timeout process that they use with their child is that they sit their child in the chair and they talk to them about why they're in the timeout chair. Now, while it is sometimes good to have those explanations and discussions with your child, that in it by itself is not a timeout. The PCIT timeout process solves some of these issues that commonly arise with the use of timeout, in that we only use the timeout process when it's absolutely necessary. So when the child has been given a command, they disobeyed the command, they've been given a timeout warning, and then they've then again disobeyed that command, only then do they go to the timeout chair. The other thing that we use that is a little bit different is that we place the child in a chair for 3 minutes plus 5 seconds of quiet. Now you might ask, why 5 seconds of quiet? Well, we want to give the child the opportunity to calm down and begin to regulate their emotions so that they're actually ready to come out of the timeout chair. Now, at the end of that 3 minutes plus 5 seconds of quiet, we're going to go over and ask that child if they're ready to actually do whatever it is that we told them to do in the first place that resulted in them disobeying and going to the timeout chair. And only if they agree do we allow them to get out of the timeout chair. Now, you may be wondering, well, what do I do if my child gets out of the timeout chair during the actual timeout? And this does sometimes happen. Well, during PCIT, we actually have backups to the timeout chair. Now, the specifics of that are actually beyond the scope of Pocket PCIT, but it is something that we have a lot of experience with within session that you'll be able to talk to your therapist about in terms of how to best deal with this. And ultimately what children learn with the backups to timeout is that it just makes the timeout process last much longer. And oftentimes the backup measure that we have to use is actually quite temporary. And children very quickly learn to just stay in the timeout chair, and over time they get quicker and quicker at calming themselves down so the timeout process actually gets shorter. And by doing this, we really have a very effective timeout process that's very effective at getting children to comply much more frequently than at the start of treatment.